behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Season 2. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our first session of the day is Land Where I Flee, Prajwal Parajuly in conversation with Elaine Canning. Humans are a nomadic species and migrations remain a constant part of the human experience, presenting an eternal battle between the search for home versus the need for individual freedom. Celebrated author Prajwal Parajuly, Land Where I Flee, has recently been shortlisted for France's Emile Guimet Prize as well as the First Nobel Prize almost 7 years after its original release. In this book, Parajuly provides an intrinsic view into the politics of caste, class, gender, and sexuality. In the story based in Gangtok, Land Where I Flee is a classic example of how some narratives continue to have a long-lasting impact many years after the initial release and shows how the written word endures and continues to resonate over time. In conversation with Elaine Canning, he navigates through exile and discovery, alienation and acceptance, and how his own history has impacted his writing journey. Prajwal Parajuly has also authored The Gurkha's Daughter and has been a judge for the Swansea University's International Dylan Thomas Prize. His best-selling collection of short stories was a finalist for the Dylan Thomas Prize in the UK and a semi-finalist for the Short Story Prize in the United States. Elaine Canning is a writer and the executive officer of the Swansea University's International Dylan Thomas Prize. Author of a book and several papers on Spanish Golden Age drama, Canning is currently working on her first short story collection and a novel and has recently completed an MA in creative writing. All our sessions, as you know, that have been broadcast till now are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. So do go on board and watch whatever session you may wish. Please do remember to ask questions and comments by typing it into the comment section below. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Ladies and gentlemen, Land Where I Flee, Prajwal Parajuly in conversation with Elaine Canning. Prajwal, Elaine, over to you both.
Thank you, Sanjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session, which is part of the Brave New World series of the fantastic Jaipur Literature Festival. Thank you so much for joining us today. Prajwal, hello. It's so lovely to see you.
Hi, Elaine. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you today about your novel, Land Where I Flee. And congratulations on your 2 shortlist nominations for your prizes in France. Absolutely fantastic. Well done.
Thank you.
So, Prajwal, let's start with the family at the heart of this story. So we have 4 siblings living in various parts of the US and the UK in very different circumstances who travel back to Gangtok for their grandmother's 84th birthday celebration. So tell us a little bit more about this family. Tell us about the matriarch at the heart of it, Chitralika, and the 4 grandchildren, and how did the idea for the novel come about?
Thank you, Elaine. Chitralika, the 84-year-old grandmother, came about simply because I was sick and tired of reading grandmothers in Indian books who pickled onions in the sun and whispered stories, bedtime stories, into the ears of her grandchildren. I wanted a different kind of a grandmother. I wanted a grandmother who was a badass like Chitraleka, who smoked beedi the way she did, who had absolutely no compunction about puffing smoke into the faces of her grandchildren if they disagreed with her or pissed her off. She also does a very good job of using this cigarette, this beedi, as an intimidating tool when she has to bargain with men of power. And yeah, Chitralekha came about simply because I hadn't read about a grandmother like her in any book to have come out of South Asia. The family, Elaine. So these characters in the book are often composites of various other various people that I've met. Um, you have a character like Rutwa, the writer, who, I mean, I don't know who he is. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but so there are bits and pieces of me in every one of the siblings, as well as in Chitralekha and Prasanthi, the sidekick. The novel came about rather organically. I love family sagas. Enid Blyton's The Family of Red Roofs, which I read and reread as a kid, may have been what actually inspired me to write a family saga. See, I grew up in a joint family. I grew up in a family with cousins, uncles, and aunts, and no one around me had a family like mine. So I was always very curious about how other families functioned. Does that
Sure.
make sense? And
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's how the book came about.
So I'm intrigued what you're saying about this intersection between the novel and your own history. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that, and particularly about your experiences of caste and class and gender and how they infiltrated your novel.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Gangtok, Sikkim, which is right next door to Bhutan. Now, when we think of Bhutan, we think of the lost Shangri-La, we think of beautiful monasteries and mountains and the nicest people in the world. And that is true to a certain extent, but Bhutan has also been responsible for a terrible ethnic cleansing experiment in which they kicked out more than 106,000 Nepali-speaking people from within its borders. No one talks about it. No one writes about it. There has perhaps been one opinion piece in the New York Times written about it. There may have been something in the New Statesman written about it, and I was the one who wrote that. So I've had an inchoate sense, growing up, I've had a sense of how there was a lot of wrong happening there, happening in a country right next to me that no one really talked about internationally. I mean, we talked about it in Gangtok, we talked about it in Darjeeling and Kalimpong, right next to Bhutan, but no newspaper paid any attention to it. So to write about that, to incorporate that in the book, seemed like seemed like a natural thing to do. Then Gangtok, Sikkim Gangtok is one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody. I know people in London say that. I know people in New York say that. I know people in Calcutta say that. I know people in Swansea say that. No, not everybody knows everybody in Swansea. In Gangtok, everybody actually knows everybody. And in the 90s, when I was growing up, it was an elopement if the son of so-and-so somehow eloped with the daughter of so-and-so, that was all the town talked about for weeks on end. It was, and if one of the recently married people happened to be from a quote-unquote higher caste, and the other happened to be from a quote-unquote lower caste, the town just wouldn't get enough of it. All the townspeople spoke about was the ostracization they would face. You would hear stories about how the grandparents accepted the new son-in-law into their fold only after a grandchild was born. So very interesting. I mean, it may have ruined many people's lives, but to write about that again, to somehow give life to this gossip that I was so familiar with, was an easy thing to do. And you could write an Indian novel without caste and class, but it would be somewhat difficult. I mean, it is so ingrained in our society here. It is, so that's how the book came about.
And what's fascinating then is that you have four siblings who all decide to take flight for a variety of reasons and so on, but they all decide to take flight. And that in itself is encapsulated in the title of your novel, Land Where I Flee. And what's really interesting then is now with the new French translation of the novel, which is fuir et revenir, so to flee, but also to return. This sense of returning and a potential need to return or an obligation to return, but that sense of returning is now encapsulated in the translation title. So I'm intrigued to know, did you have any discussions about the title of the French translation? How do you feel about the concept of returning embodied within that title?
I think the French title is beautiful. I think it's so poetic, and I love the way it sounds. And I will have you know that I had nothing to do with it.
Interesting.
Our publisher sent 3 or 4 potential titles. I do not remember what the other 3 titles were, but not one of them was as mellifluous as Fue Revenir. I love the way it sounded, and I especially like the way that it encapsulated the return to, because Land Where I Flee, is a good enough title, but it's all about fleeing, all right? It's all about getting the hell out of Gangtok. And Fue Revenir, which in English means to flee and to return, is in my opinion, a better title for the novel. I had nothing to do with it, Elaine. My publishers in France, Emmanuel Collar, have done all the great things that have happened to the novel, honestly, and I'm extremely grateful to them. It was my publisher who came up with the title too.
But it's lovely that you were able to look at 4 different choices, and you were able to actually think about the rhythm and so on, and the nuances of the title. And what's interesting is 7 years on, that you were able to think about what actually best encapsulated what your novel is about in terms of rhythm, but also in terms of context, which is lovely. I'd like now to deep dive a little bit into the characters of your novel. And I'd like to start with Bua and Mansa, because as a reader, to me, these 2 characters really do demonstrate, the extent to which both these characters conform to traditional practices, be that willingly in the case of Bua, or be that begrudgingly in the case of Mansa. So you have Bua, who is a former foreign minister in Nepal, who's now disabled and is looked after by his daughter-in-law, Mansa. And Mansa, of course, she's an Oxford graduate, and she sacrificed her career for a marriage. And so in relation to Mansa, I have to say that my favorite line in the novel is a reference in there to her Oxford degree, and it's compared to an awe-inspiring pink lipstick, shocking, and something that could adorn no woman in the great dynasty. So I wondered if you could talk to us about the mindsets of these characters, the values and the traditions that you wanted to explore when you decided to integrate them into your text.
So many people who've read the novel have asked me for both a sequel and a prequel. I think part of the reason for that is the way Manasa's character develops. In actually, all the characters develop in very interesting ways, if I may say so myself. But Mansa doing what she does at the end, and again, I do not want to give the ending away to people who haven't read the book, but See, Elaine, I have come across a lot of very old families, families that can trace their ancestry back to the 1700s. That may educate their girls, may give them the best of everything, may send them to Oxford, etc., etc., but somehow not be very open to the idea of the woman working as a banker or a professor. I've come across a number of families in the Nepali-speaking world who are like that. Now, Manasa doesn't know how to make sense of this. I don't think she's been married to Himal for very long. I mean, she is the third youngest in the family, so I'm guessing they haven't been married for very long. But she's trying to make peace with this disabled father-in-law. She is questioning what the hell she's doing with her life. It's all there, and I think she's the most bitter character in the entire book. She still hasn't made, the trip home actually gives her a moment to reflect and realize that this life that she is living is not the life that she wants to live. Okay, precisely because, she's become a caretaker to her inconsiderate father-in-law who has no idea that he's being inconsiderate. He has no idea that he has reduced his daughter-in-law into a caregiver, into nothing more than a caregiver. And again, I like what she does in the end. I like that she ellipsis.
Don't go there.
It is emblematic of a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, of a number of families that I've seen. They may place a premium on education. They may believe in highly educated women. And yet when it comes to this woman having a professional career at the cost of, her family being ignored, the family has a problem.
Sure. And it's intriguing that when you take these four siblings, you bring them back to Gangtok, but they go back without their families, without their day-to-day circumstances. So you bring them back integrated into one family unit again, with all of those differences and so on that they have to unravel. And one of them who appears is Ruthwa, who I want to talk to you about. He arrives like this mini tornado. He literally cuts right through the narrative and completely changes the tone of the novel. And obviously he's got a past. He's been involved in some plagiarism scandal, and he's now comes back and declares that he's writing a book of non-fiction. Was he there from the outset, or is Ruthwa a voice that developed as you were writing the novel itself? When did Ruthwa arrive?
Thank you for such a careful, insightful reading of the novel, Elaine. You are a dream interviewer.
You're too kind.
Ruthwa was incubated right around the time I got my book deal for the collection of short stories. It so happened that I started working on the novel a little before I signed a 2-book deal with Kirkus in London. Now, the media were treating me like the new Gandhi. They may not have read a word of what I'd written, but I was being called the harbinger of the resurgence of the short story and the next big thing in South Asian fiction, and so on and so forth. All great things, but there were times I would stay awake until the wee hours, not writing, but thinking about what would happen if somehow the books wouldn't live up to the hype.
Sure.
Okay? And what would happen? What would happen if this if I wouldn't be able to fulfill whatever expectations were thrown my way? What if the book disappointed? What if the book? What if I inadvertently lifted lines from somewhere? What if? What if? And that is how the character of Ruthwa was born. I think your next question is going to be about whether Ruthwa is Prajwal Parajuly or.
That's up to you. That's up to you, Prajwal. I think
I have often mentioned that Ruthwa is Prajwal Parajuly gone bad. And yeah, Ruthwa was not one of the original siblings. And thank you again for asking that question.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome. If I can keep you where you started, in answer to that question in terms of the 2-book deal that you had. So the Gurkha's Daughter, your short story collection, highly acclaimed short story collection, and this novel. And I'm really interested to know about the writing process of those two together, because it was a 2-book deal. Did you find then that you were writing the short stories and the novel at the same time? Did you find that one was informing the other? How did that happen in the most practical sense?
So Elaine, I decided to start my writing with a collection of short stories because I mistakenly thought that a novel would be extremely difficult. I didn't think I had it in me to write a novel. I figured with short stories, I'd write one story and then another and then a third one. You have a sense of finality, you have a sense of accomplishment with the completion of every story. You don't really have to visit page 7 when you're on page 107 to see if something falls in place, etc., etc. I wrote the novel only after I'd gotten the book deal, and I may have had a chapter before that, but the vast majority of the novel was after the book deal. Now, because everything that could go right with my life was going right, the novel flowed out of me. It was an easy book to write. I do think that the novel is a tad overwritten. I do think the novel has flaws, but we won't get into that. It may have been that I had evolved considerably as a writer between the first book and the second, for the second book to have been so much easier than the first one. Mm-hmm. But writing the collection of short stories was difficult. Bringing every one of the stories to a satisfactory resolution was hard. And of the 2 books, I do think the first book is superior to the second one. Okay, did one inform the other? Yeah, in much the way that all the writing that I'd done before in my life informed the writing of the 2 books. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the short story versus the novel. That's exactly my experience as I begin that short story and novel writing sort of experience. But it's yeah, you think that this short story is this one composite form and you can finish it and move on to the next. But it's much more complex than that if you're trying to pull those together into a collection. And you end up with a plethora of characters and themes and so on that you're working with. But to take you back to your novel, I mean, what an achievement that 7 years on, your novel has been translated into French. It's just absolutely fantastic and to huge critical acclaim. So huge congratulations again on that. But there obviously, within the novel, there has to be something in there that resonates with people today, that a novel written 7 years ago can now be translated into another language, that it's resonating, that it's appealing, that there is something within that that guarantees its enduring quality. So what do you think that is from your perspective, Prajwal? What do you think it is about the novel
You know, Elaine, this takes me back to what critic John Gall, who had written a very long, flattering review for the Guardian, for the Gurkha's Daughter in the Guardian, told me about Land Where I Flee after he read it. He said, "This feels like I'm watching a French movie." Okay. At
Yeah.
that point, I paid his comment no mind. I thought he was simply being generous, or but after I've seen how the book resonated with French reading people, I do wonder if that's what it is. There is something very French about the book. There is something, I have watched a few French movies, a few family reunions that again, okay, a family reunion from hell should belong in any culture, should resonate with people reading in any culture, right? Part of the reason the book has done so well and has been nominated for all these awards is because of my publisher, because of the wonderful work the translator has done. I also think French booksellers have been incredible. You know, I do not know of a country that has independent bookstores as supportive as France does. So yeah, that's one of the reasons. And at the end of the day, I think a family reunion from hell is will resonate with people anywhere in the world. Yeah, I am extremely grateful for, and a bit embarrassed that a book that was written so long ago, that was published so long ago, still continues being read, being talked about, and that's wonderful. But it also means I don't have a third book to talk about, which is kind of sad, but it is what it is.
Well, but it is wonderful. I wondered whether you've yet had the opportunity. I know that current circumstances make it really difficult for us in terms of events and festivals and so on. But I wondered if you'd yet had the opportunity um, to be involved in an event in France. You know, whether that's virtual, for example, where you actually have had the French public who are reading your translation engaging with you and what their views on the book are, and whether you've had a chance to have those conversations yet or whether they're coming soon.
I participated in a literature festival online sometime in July or August. The French embassy in India had organized something. So that was a remarkable experience. Oh, Elaine, one more thing. The French love reading about cultures other than theirs more than any other people in the world, in my opinion. Um, the more exotic the place, the better, I guess. So I think that helped the book too. But no, I've had a number of people write to me about the book and how much fun it's been, etc., etc. So all that has been nice. I'm hoping I get to go to France soon and interact with people there. That would be nice.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Good luck. Good luck with making that happen. Um, I've got, before we hand over to the audience, and I'm sure people have got lots of questions for you. I just have a couple more, if I may. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your writing process and your writing practices. What does that look like? What does a writing day look like for you? And do you have such a thing as a writing day?
The opposite. It's the opposite of that, Elaine. I am the most ill-disciplined person I know. In life as well as in writing, I do not do anything I do not want to do. It's awful. It makes me sound like some bohemian saint, but that's not the case. Not be like me, honestly. I write only when I feel like it. The result,
And
Nothing has been written for the past 7 years. Yeah, sorry, Elaine. You were saying something?
That was my next question. So what's next? What are you working on, or
Uh,
what's next for
I,
you?
I know there will be a third book before 2035 or 2040. There may not be a fourth book. I do not think I'm one of those writers who will spend all their lives writing. That might be, there will be a third book at some point in my life, but it won't be anytime soon. I do not know what it will be about. It's Elaine, I've discovered that, I've come across so many writers who write a certain number of words a day, who reward themselves after writing 2,500 words a day. I tried all that early on in my writing career in 2012, 2011. I tried that when I was on my creative writing masters, but it didn't work for me. I have written for 17-hour stretches. I now know better than to let go of the burst of inspiration when it strikes. I have written for continuously for a week. In fact, big chunks of both my books were written over these very short periods. And so I don't know what's next. There will be a third book. I don't know when.
Do you know, in terms, you talked a little bit about genre, and you talked about the challenges of the short story. So do you anticipate that your third book will be a novel rather than a short story collection? Is that where you see yourself?
It will definitely be a novel. Writing a novel is far easier than writing a short story collection. Sorry to all these purists out there, but it will definitely be a novel.
Well, that's good. That's great to hear. So before we hand over to the audience, I'd like just to take us back again to where we started. And so, we talked about this family. We talked about the complexities of this family. This is a book which is about both home and exile. It's about concealment. It's about discovery. Is there any resolution for all of that? Do you see this book as one thing more than the other? How would you describe your book in a few words?
At the end of the day, Elaine, it's a juicy family saga.
A juicy family saga.
I wouldn't read it too much into the other things. It's a reunion where secrets threaten to unravel, where past rivalries are revisited, where the unresolved angst still doesn't get resolved, and that's how life is. You can't tie everything with a cute bow at the end of the day, and just a juicy family saga, nothing more than the other.
If only we could tie everything with a cute bow, eh?
I know. Really wonderful. I'd have written 5 books by now if that.
Thank you so much, Prajwal. We've got questions coming in from the audience. So just let me, just bear with me. Okay. So we've one question here from Vidya, who asks, you're a Nepali Indian English language author. You grew up in Sikkim, and you have been recently nominated for France's First Novel Prize. How do you relate to this mix of cultural and linguistic affiliations?
That's a good question. It's I wish I could write in Nepali as well as I do in English. It's unfortunate that my Nepali is not as good as my English is, Nepali is my mother tongue. It is a beautiful language, and I do call Land Where I Flee. Oh, Elaine, besides being a juicy family saga, Land Where I Flee is also a love letter to the Nepali language. I do not because I can't write about how amazing my language is in my language, I choose to write about it in another language, which is also my language, but not in the way that Nepali is. And as far as translations go, it's wonderful. I mean, we're living in this very global world where a movie that is released in India doesn't have to be watched by people in India alone. You can watch it everywhere in the world. And I'm glad translations make something similar happen with books.
Absolutely.
At the and finally, I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful that there are readers out there. There are readers reading the book in the language it was not originally written in countries I never thought the book would be read in. It's just gratitude at the end of the day. So thank you to all my readers watching this.
Sure. And multiculturalism, multilingualism are just so important to us, aren't they? In terms of the arts and culture sector. So Ajita asks, after having read both your short stories and Land Where I Flee, I feel you have a fascination with strong women characters, which I enjoy a lot. Is that one of your conscious choices made in writing?
I have grown up around very, very strong women. I enjoy writing female characters far more than I do male characters. I think there's more depth to them, and this just takes me back to one of the stories in the Gurkha's Daughter, but I'm not going to get into that now. But yeah, it is. I would say it is a conscious choice. Is it a conscious choice? I didn't think about it until reviewers started calling attention to it, until readers like you, Ajita, started talking about it. But so maybe back then it was not a conscious choice, but I do realize, I did realize with Land Where I Flee, I was subconsciously writing these very strong characters, and it's a lot of fun writing strong female characters. I hope I continue doing it.
Lovely. We've got a great question from Shalin, which follows on really nicely from that. So Shalin asks, both your books, The Gurkha's Daughter and Land Where I Flee, seem to be linked, yet can be read independent of each other. Was that a conscious decision, or did it just happen? And which came first? Which came first in creation?
That's incredible. I love questions like this, because every one of the characters in The Gurkha's Daughter makes a cute little appearance in Land Where I Flee. Again, these characters in The Gurkha's Daughter have absolutely nothing to do with Land Where I Flee, but I just figured it would be a nudge, nudge, wink, wink, to a very devoted reader. To answer your question, The Gurkha's Daughter came before Land Where I Flee. The decision to incorporate, a sentence each about some of the characters of The Gurkha's Daughter into Land Where I Flee came about later on in the novel. I just thought it would be fun to do. I did not talk about it anywhere. It was, readers started writing to me saying, "Hey, Kali from the cleft makes a little appearance in a sentence in Land Where I Flee," etc., etc. And The Gurkha's Daughter was conceptualized at least 2.5 years before Land Where I Flee was. It's definitely the older of the two books. And in fact, one of the reasons I signed a book deal with Quirkers as opposed to other publishers who were interested in signing me back then was because the publisher at Quirkers, John Riley, was insistent that The Gurkha's Daughter come out before the second book, whatever the second book was going to be. It hadn't yet seen the light of day. And, a lot of the other publishers said, "Look, we love this. We will sign you, but could we have the novel first? Could we publish the novel first?" But I didn't want to I didn't want to commit to a publishing deal where a novel that hadn't yet been written would come out first. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that, Prajwal. We've got lots of questions still coming through. I'll try to get through as many as I can. Two very interesting ones here. The first from Subhankar, who asks about a character we didn't even get time to talk about, Agastya. So Subhankar asks, I want you to talk about Agastya, a successful New York oncologist who hasn't come out to his family and has a boyfriend, Nikki. Where did he come from? And does his trajectory remain representative for closeted Indian gay men in self-imposed exile from their homeland today?
You know, if I had written the book a year ago or 2 years ago, chances are at the end of the book, Agastya would have been out. Or Agastya would have been out from the beginning itself, which could have been the reason for the rift between him and his grandmother. I do think things are changing. Back in 2012, it was homosexual relationships were still illegal. When I wrote the book, at least, they were still illegal in India, and now they're legal. I think things are changing, and I think things will continue to change.
Okay, that's really interesting.
For the better, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that the translation now gives you the opportunity to be able to talk about, the issues that you address in the novel, both from the perspective of 7 years ago and what is happening now. So Ria asks, this is a question by Chitralika. So Chitralika is looked after by Prasanthi, who belongs to the LGBTQ community. And the question is about Indian society. It still seems to regard eunuchs with a mixture of contempt and superstitious caution. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, I wrote the character of Prasanthi because I think every writer who grows up in South Asia wants to write about eunuchs. There's everyone wants to write about them. But one of the challenges when I initially started writing Prasanthi, I realized I was doing with Prasanthi what a lot of Bollywood movies do. I was writing her as this comic relief. I was writing her into the book as she was becoming a bit of a caricature, which is what, again, Bollywood movies are guilty of doing. It was on a second reading that I realized that while all the other characters were growing, Prasanthi was still a bit of a comic relief, and I did not want that at all because, here was a person who had lived this, who had gone through these awful experiences, who had lived this terrible life, and she deserved to be seen as a human, as more of a human than all these, than the depictions you see in a lot of movies. Again, I am no expert to comment on how we in India treat eunuchs, but there is a certain kind of beauty in solidarity in the community that built for themselves. Because someone like Prasanthi, had she grown up in Kalimpong, instead of going to did she go to Bombay or Madras, where she discovers a whole lot of other people, a whole lot of people like her, it would have been really bad. It would have been really awful. And one could argue that Prasanthi actually has had a pretty good life. She has been adopted by a wealthy, powerful woman. She's living in a nice house. She has a roof over her head. She's eating good food, and so she may not be representative of the actual troubles, of the actual problems faced by a vast majority of eunuchs in India.
Thank you so much, Prajwal. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We've got lots of questions that we didn't get to, and our apologies for that. But thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you Prajwal for an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I wish you all the very best with the nominations. It's been a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much, and thanks everybody. Sanjoy, I shall now hand back to you.
Thank you, Prajwal, and thank you, Elaine, for that beautiful conversation about Land Where I Flee. Really, that was so evocative and so beautifully strung together. I do hope all of you enjoyed the session and will log back on at 8:30 p.m. for our next session on JLF's Brave New World, Landscapes of Memory, Tishani Doshi and Carlo Pizzati in conversation. Location and landscape inform the work of Tishani Doshi and Carlo Pizzati, and in this evocative session, they talk about how the landscapes they share, the little Dolomites of northern Italy and the coast of Tamil Nadu, both ground and displace them. Meanwhile, we're delighted to be back with our much loved India by the Bay festival from Hong Kong. Over the past 5 years, India by the Bay has established itself as one of Hong Kong's landmark cultural festivals, which fuses classical and contemporary across art, music, theatre, dance, food, literature, film, and wellness. The sixth edition of India by the Bay is from the 15th to the 18th of October and includes Daniel Simpson on wellness, Shashi Tharoor and Mukalika Banerjee, Romy Gill and Chef Piku on food, Shubhendra Rao and Tosho Man in a wonderful collaboration on music. We look forward to welcoming you on board.